Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel on famous female screenwriters who you should know. Some are from the past, so they're long dead, but their memory has been left behind because all the textbooks will tell you about the famous male directors and not tell you about the women who wrote the movies they made their money on. So some of them will be women from long before any of you were born, long before I was born. Some of them will be women whose work is happening right now that you can support now that you know their names. So we're very excited to be bringing you this program sponsored by the Stevens College MFA in TV and Screenwriting. And we have some alumni here in the room, yay. I am Dr. Rosanne Welch. I teach the history of screenwriting and one-hour drama for that program. I've been in television for 15 or more years, and I am happy to say I didn't bring my copy, but tomorrow at the Skylight Bookstore from 1 to 3, that's a bookstore, brand new, it's right next to Lakota Coffee House. Oh, here we go, the book's in the back. This is a book of chapters on some of these women and many more from the early days of Hollywood, the famous films they wrote, what their careers were like. It was written by our inaugural class, and so we're going to be there from 1 to 3 at Skylark doing a book signing. Everyone will do about 2 minutes on their famous person. Today they're going to do about 8 minutes. Some of these women are not in the book because they're more recent writers. So you get a little quick 8-minute presentations, a little bit of karaoke going on, so that you can hear about these famous women. So I'm happy to say we're ready to get started. Our first speaker is Yadana Daniels, and she's going to speak about a current screenwriter, Gina Prince-Bythewood, who you will recognize some of her work. Please come on up, Yadana.
And good morning, everybody.
Good morning. All right.
Gina Prince-Bythewood, one of the best, most conscientious writer, director, producers that you may never have ever heard of. Thank you. Just to keep myself on time, let's turn that on. All right. With 2 Daytime Emmy nominations, a Humanitas Award, a couple of more Humanitas nominations, a number of NAACP Image Awards, an Independent Spirit Award, oh yeah, and about that Oscar that her film won for Best Original Song, and yet maybe her name isn't as big. But that's okay. I'm going to tell you all about her, and then you can go do your own research. All right. So, all that said, as her actress friend, Sanaa Lathan said, she is a force to be reckoned with. Now, if you've seen any of her films, who's ever seen a Gina Prince-Bythewood film that she's directed or written? Wow, that's great. About 5 folks. That's still great, because when I say these things, you'll be able to identify with them. Awesome. All right. So, there's typically themes to her films that she writes and directs. One of the things that I noticed, I'm sure maybe you have your own set that you noticed, the characters are strong women of color who already have it all long before they meet you. Long before they meet that man in their lives. Everything they need, they already have, with the exception of that one thing. The next theme that I notice is these women tend to all be on a journey looking for a hidden piece or lost piece of themselves. That's typically their journey that I noticed. And like I said, you may have noticed your own set, but that's what I noticed. Also, and I'll tell you this early, I meant to get to it later in the screen. Well, how about we just go on to the first screen? The men in her films, Beyond the Lights, and we'll get to that in a second, as well as Love and Basketball, they make career choices, or in some people's eyes, career sacrifices, but those sacrifices that enhance the relationship, they only make the men stronger, not weaker. And so that is really huge, because normally we see women making sacrifices for their men in our films, and here the men are making career choices that put the spotlight on the women and the relationship. All right, now let's go on to that. Okay, one last thing. She also tends to explore and share uplifting stories about Black women with multicultural audiences with the purpose of encouraging feelings of empathy and identifying with the person on the screen that just happens to be Black. So that's important. And something also important to me She keeps her films right at about a PG-13 level so that young women can come and see and experience her films. So, I'm going to tell you why. As a person in high school, she experienced low self-esteem, a good taste of racism that apparently affected her, and depression. That all changed when she saw that. She saw a trailer for She's Gotta Have It. And it changed her perspective because she saw people on screen who looked like her. Representation matters. It changes the way a person sees themselves, and it also changes how they view what they can do in life. All right. So, she'd also experienced this phenomenon again when she goes on to write in the writer's room of A Different World. So, some of you are familiar with that sitcom. She got her start in comedy. That's a great place to get started in. But how did she get there, you ask? Let me tell you. She didn't end up, she was rejected from film school. That's how she got in. There was a journey there. I'll fill you in. So here she is. She's on the set of Ghost Dad. And Bill Cosby is a mentor to her. Now, for some of you, it might make you cringe hearing that name. And then for some, whether you view it cringeworthy or whether you view it as he's a part of history and a part of making history with her, he was still her mentor through that time in her life. So, she gets rejected from film school and feeling terrible about it. She tells him about it. He lends her his name, along with Mr. Gordon, missing his name. Yes, Gordon L. Berry. They both lend her their names to put on her appeal letter. She gets in. Has a scholarship, graduates. So now, Bill Cosby does her another favor. He sets her up with an interview at the show, A Different World. Introduces her to Yvette Lee Bowser. All right, fine. She goes into the interview and bombs! Does not get the job! Oh no! Peril! But she does what they tell us to do all the time. Don't give up. She called the production office all the time after that. The guy who they hired didn't work out. Because she kept calling and continued to be persistent, they picked her up. All right, on that same show, not only was she working with Yvette Lee Bowser and Susan Fels Hill, she also met someone else really important, Reggie Bythewood, whom she married. All right. Oh, and ironically, the person who was rejected from film school, 18 years later, she was named UCLA's Filmmaker of the Year of the School of Theater, Film, and Television's annual Director's Spotlight. 18 years later. Wow. All right. Let's go on to her shows. She started off in comedy, so started off here in A Different World, went to another comedy, South Central, which she calls a drama with jokes. All these others. And What About Your Friends garnered her 2 Daytime Emmy nominations, 1 in writing and 1 in directing. Love and Basketball. She took 2 years off from TV to write and direct Love and Basketball. Talk about swagger. We'll talk about that in a second. But her swagger got her $14 million to make this film. The first offer for funds to make this film, she turned it down. Not knowing if she could get funds from anywhere else, but she turned it down in order to get that script standing tall and looking good. Then she goes back to 40 Acres and a Mule, which is Spike Lee's company, has her meeting, and walks out with $14 million to make the film. Secret Life of Bees. Right? Something really interesting. A project fell through that she was going to direct, that she really wanted to be on. It fell through because she couldn't get an A-list actor to sign on with a new director, and this is her next film. This is it. Bunch of awards. We'll move on. Beyond the Lights. This is a film. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. Excellent film. likened very much to The Bodyguard, won an Academy Award for Best Original Song. She went back to television, but this time as a director, going back to sitcoms. Everybody hates Kris Somerville. Bernie Mac Show. And she was executive producer and director on Cloak and Dagger, Shots Fired. She produced, wrote, and directed the miniseries Shots Fired. Now, swagger. This is something she believes heavily in. As an athlete herself, she says, swagger is the belief we can belong in any setting, succeed in any setting. It's okay to be the best. It's okay to be in charge. Talent has no gender. Leadership has no gender. She puts it, badass has no gender. Without swagger, I'm just that shy girl who can't find her voice. With it, I'm the baddest chick in the room. So go find your swagger. Run faster. Be aggressive. Go after it. And leave it all on the floor.
Hello. So yes, I'm here to talk to you today about Julie Plec. She may not yet be a household name in television, but to her fandoms, she might be considered the Shonda Rhimes of the CW network. So let's get going here. She has brought to the network The Vampire Diaries with Kevin Williamson, The Originals, Legacies, Containment, and The Tomorrow People. She is a jack of all trades, wearing the hats of writer, producer, and director, helming episodes of The Vampire Diaries, Riverdale, and the new Roswell reboot, which she's also executive producing. Earlier this year, Plec signed a multi-year deal with Warner Brothers as well. But what's interesting, Plec has never fancied herself a writer, like ever. She began her career in Hollywood as an assistant to an agent, then became the assistant to Wes Craven on Scream, where she met her future work husband, Kevin Williamson, who happened to show her a script for a little show called Dawson's Creek that he was working on. She went on to executive produce that in season 2 while he was on Teaching Mrs. Tingle. But she really didn't get her start on writing until she started working on Kyle XY for ABC. See some fans. They had lost their only female writer on the show, and the executive producer said, hey, you know the show as well as anybody else, why don't you write an episode? And according to her, it was literally that easy, which it was always that easy. She ended up penning 8 episodes over its 3-season run. So about the same time, an executive at the CW approached Julie Plec and Kevin Williamson, an executive from the CW, did I say that? Probably. They had optioned a book series from the 1990s, and they were looking for writers. And as Plec puts it, we volunteered. That series was The Vampire Diaries, which premiered on the CW in 2009. Now, they were very concerned that people would only see it as the TV version of Twilight because the source material was similar to Stephanie Meyer's books. So in order to differentiate it, Plec and Williamson centered the series around the town of Mystic Falls instead of just like the love triangle aspect. So doing this opened up the entire world and centuries of history, as she puts it. As the show evolved, its focus also shifted to the brotherly bond between Damon and Stefan Salvatore, exploring how they dealt with loss and ultimately their redemption. So they had differentiated it, which was good, but it still needed to find its niche. And it did. The Vampire Diaries found its home in the sweet spot between the other 2 vampire series, Twilight and True Blood. Where Twilight lacked gore and traditional vampire lore, Vampire Diaries made up for it. Where True Blood went full throttle with sex and violence, Vampire Diaries toned it back a bit. So it was truly a vampire sweet spot. So the Vampire Diaries aired for 8 seasons, making it the longest running primetime vampire series, beating out Buffy the Vampire Slayer by 1 season. I know. Of the experience, Plec states, Kevin Williamson and I wrote a show about loss and grief that just so happened to have vampires in it. We touched people with that story, and maybe we even helped people. We certainly helped ourselves. This show left an imprint on my heart. And while Vampire Diaries will always hold a special place in her heart, there were still more stories to tell. Plec created the spin-off The Originals, which centered on the first family of vampires who made their debut in season 2 of the Vampire Diaries. She found that they were trimming back storylines for these characters in any given episode, so having a spin-off was a no-brainer. It premiered in 2013, and it just ended its 5-year run this past August. But there are still more stories to tell. Plec's newest spinoff is called Legacies, and that premiered last Thursday.
Oh, man.
So, it's in week 2. It centers around Hope Michelson, who is the daughter of the original vampire-werewolf hybrid Klaus, as she navigates life at school for supernatural kids. It also features the character of Alaric Saltzman from the Vampire Diaries as well. So I think it's safe to say that Plec knows a thing or two about working in television, and she calls it a game of survival. She goes on to compare writing for television to a machine and has a colorful description for a bad day. It's a runaway train. It's a relentless assault on your sanity, soul, friendships, self-esteem, liver, patience, kindness, faith in humanity, blood pressure, stress levels, personal life, and your ability to parent and care for something, anything, whether a child or a plant. So she doesn't sugarcoat things, but she also knows that the good days tend to outweigh the bad, and she also offers advice to TV writers. She views a staff writer's job is to emulate and mimic their showrunner so the series has a cohesive voice. She also suggests you pay attention to the showrunner's pet peeves. For instance, Miss Plec hates exclamation points. Noted. Plec also points out that being a staff writer is a training ground for becoming a showrunner. She explains that it's not about whether or not your ideas are taken, it's about how to present yourself for success in the environment of a writer's room and to really suck in every step of the process. In an Entertainment Weekly article, she graciously outlines her 5 tongue-in-cheek key steps to writing a good finale. In her words, here they are. Step 1. May of the previous season, decide how you want next season to end. If you haven't figured it out before you start shooting in July, you're very likely screwed. It's cliche, but weddings, graduations, founders' days, vampire cures, and major character exits make for a big idea, an easy big idea to build the finale around. Step 2. Take a very brief vacation, during which you hope that 5 minutes of rest and relaxation don't give you the clarity to realize all of your big plans suck. Step 3. Don't stall. Never stall. If you can't make your pitch hold out until the finale, use it early or ditch it. Also, be flexible. The perfect idea you had may need some tweaking before you get there. Step 4. Survive episodes 12 to 17. Your first chapter is complete, but you're not close enough to start building to the finale. You're going to need another big idea to get you through the middle. For example, from the Vampire Diaries, you had the Tomb Vampires from Season 1, the Winnebago Werewolves from Season 2, and the undaggering of the original family in Season 3, etc. And finally, Step 5. It's finale time. Break the last act first. You already know what you want it to be, then earn your way towards it. If you build the end of the season right, the story will come together with ease. If you've misjudged the last few episodes, you will suffer mightily. But the good news is it will all be over in a matter of days, until you start next season edits. Julie Plec is a fierce producer, director, and even writer, much to her own surprise. In creating The Vampire Diaries with Kevin Williamson and then the originals and legacies, she's brought forth her passion for telling stories about familial relationships that reach beyond the show's genre. While making it in Hollywood isn't easy, and she'd be the first to say so, for Plec, it's worth it. Reflecting on the end of The Vampire Diaries, she states, "As we brought our business to an end, we all got to be artists and human beings, and it was beautiful."
My name is Yasser Shahin. I am an Arab American screenwriter. I live in the state of Washington, and I love Seahawks. Any Seahawks fans? There you go, no more. I'm married and I have a daughter, so if I pause in the middle of my presentation for a little bit, just to let you know, it's my daughter. I'm just thinking about her. She's my Juliet. Okay, so Jean Gauntier was born on May 17, 2000. We wish. 1885. If my goal today for all of you, before you leave here, is I want to make sure that you leave with new information about Jean Gauntier than you walked into the room. And not only that, I want this information to resonate with you and to spark some questions within you and go out and find more, because I cannot talk enough about Jean Gauntier, especially within 8 minutes. So please search more, look more for more information. But I'll hit the main stops and main events in her life, so this way we can talk, address what Jean Gauntier has done. Who is Jean Gauntier? Jean Gauntier, a screenwriter who was among the pioneers who made it into early Hollywood in the silent era and established a lot of the rules. And we'll come into that. Her story starts when she, after age 21, that was around around 1906, 1905. She wanted to do an audition. She wanted to start getting into Hollywood and acting and so on. So she met Sidney Olcott, and he asked her if she could audition for a stunt where she would be in the water. She told him, "I can't swim." He told her, "Oh, you'll be fine." He soothed her, he calmed her, said, "You'll be fine, not much water, you'll get in, you'll get out, no problem. You won't even get wet." He goes, "Okay, I'll do it." She went on the scene, and Frank J. Marion was the producer of the film. And when she found out that she had to get into 30 feet of water, she was shocked. And she felt that she was lied to just to get into the role. She wanted to pull out. Frank Marion was furious and he was angry that he almost canceled the day. Sidney Olcott talked Jean Gauntier into doing the role, and she did. She ended up actually almost drowning. People had to get her out of the water. But she proved to the men in that era that she can actually do it, and she can actually make what she wants to make and pursue her dreams. And ended up making the film. People at the time, cast, were getting paid $3 a day. She was paid $5. Can do it. And then from that point on, she continued on with her work, and then to the point she would write stuff, but nobody would buy it. She would write stuff and nobody would produce it. She would get a lot of rejections for her work until she wrote Tom Sawyer. Once she did that, she says in her memoir, once she hit that point, nothing after that she wrote was rejected. Everything was produced, made, or acted whatsoever. So, no, lesson of life. You will hit that wall, but suddenly one time you will find that peak in it, and you'll be able to actually get into your dreams. This is significant, and this is one of the major things that we must know about Jean Gauntier, Ben-Hur. A lot of you know this movie, and the reason why this movie is significant to us and film and history is because it established the copyright law that we have right now. The story behind this book, Jean Gauntier was, after she wrote Tom Sawyer, Marion asked her in 2 days to read the book and to write the screenplay so that they can shoot on the 3rd day. In 2 days, she went out and she read the book, she wrote the scenario at the time, and then she gave it to Marion gave it to Sidney Olcott, and they decided to shoot the film. Marion made a mistake, and he found out later on what his mistake was. He hired a stage manager to actually direct this film. Then after a few days, it was a disaster, a complete disaster. Sidney stepped in, Marion appreciated that Sidney stepped in, and Sidney took over. Jean was very happy because Jean and Sidney, they were working so well together. When Sidney took on the film, they finished it in 8 days, from start to finish. Among the people who were watching this film, and this one was real all over the places, people watched it over and over. Among the people who watched it were the Harbour brothers, who are the writers of the book. Okay, and then Lou Wallace, the publishing agent at the time, they were not happy. Somebody's making money off of their book, so they filed a lawsuit. 4 years later, this film came in 1907. 1911, the Supreme Court, all the way, this case got to the Supreme Court, ruled in favor of the Harbour brothers, costing the company that Jean Gauntier was working with, the Campany company, costing them $25,000 in fee for the Harbour brothers, and another $25,000 in legal fees, which made the film at the time the costliest one reel of all time. Plus whatever it cost to make that film. From that point on, Jean Gauntier became the Campany girl, because she was the very first woman to actually work in that company and make it that far and that well. from that point on, Callum adopted the idea that films should be made outside, not inside. So they traveled all over the world, and one of the most significant films Callum made, and Jean Gauntier wrote, and that's also another significant film, was From the Manger to the Cross, Jesus of Nazareth. This is significant because the film took place completely outside of the United States. At the time, people were not making films outside the United States. Everything was inside, and if it's inside, indoor, and so on. So at the time, they made this, and they traveled to Egypt, but also they traveled to Palestine. They made that film in Palestine, and they hired Arabs for extras, and they paid them money, and it wasn't that they didn't have to bring a lot of people in, and this film made it very well for the company. It was significant because cast was from Palestine, indigenous people, but cost so much money because traveling all over the place. The length of the movie was 70 minutes. At the time, it was about 30 to 40 minutes max. This film made it to 70, and then the location, of course, we talked about. But here's the thing: Marion made it clear to Jean and that under any circumstances, Jesus should be depicted in a human being body. No, alive if you have to do. Other than that, Jesus should not be brought up. Jean actually convinced Marion at the end that he should come out, and they actually, Jesus in the film comes up depicted in a human body, and he was actually crucified into the film. And that film was critically acclaimed all the time until now. Actually, it's on YouTube. You can actually watch it. One of the few films that made it to our life. Some images of the film, and this is in Palestine. This is something Jean Gauntier wrote in her memoir, which she wrote. She started in 1928, and she says, as you can read, life never stands still, nor we would wish to have it. Suffice for our memories in our epic of our lives, with its joy and its sorrow, its thrills and adventure, its affections and achievements. We would not live through them again, nor yet we desire to part with the memories of the days when we were blazing the trail. And that's the name of her memoir, Blazing the Trail. Jean Gauntier was married to Jack J. Clark in 1912, but divorced him in 1918, and she exited Hollywood in 1920. So you can tell from all that time, from the time she started in 1905 to 1920, not much, but she made a lot of impact. She died in 1966. Very sincerely yours, Jean Gauntier. Read more about her. Thank you so much.
So, Ruth and Baldwin. I chose this writer because her last name was Baldwin, and I took a chance. Maybe she's related to Alec Baldwin. Wasn't the case. But, you know, there was this quote about her that said, she talks while she types too, which I thought was really funny because I think if you're a writer in here, you know, you probably mumble too. Oh, you mumble when you text, right? Like, you're just like, I love you too. So, you know, it's just a writer thing. Everybody has a writer in them. And I just thought that was really inclusive for everybody, and I thought that was a really cool title for this. So we're going to find out where that quote comes from in a bit. But who's the woman behind the page? So she and a lot of other female writers at the time worked for Universal, and they basically built that company from the ground up. The company became very distinguished for her titles. She was one of Universal's top screenwriters. There's very little known about her. You will find that after this presentation, you'll leave with more questions and answers, which is fun. There's a lot of contradicting and inaccurate information about her, like where did she die, or exactly the date of her birth. It's more, we just know when, like the year. This is her, very beautiful woman. Early life. So sources say that she was born in 1887. Official documents say 1886. There's no month or day. She was a very dedicated journalist. At the time, there were a lot of journalists who became screenwriters afterwards. It's just this trend. I think it has something to do with, it's more after seeing a story happening, they would record it. I think they just wanted to make the story happen themselves. That's just my reading into it. So she joined Universal in 1913 as an editor, and then she eventually became a screenwriter. It just happened. We don't know how. So she met her future husband, Leo Pearson. I forgot to put my timer. I'm so sorry. I won't go past. She met her husband on the Universal lot, and he was an established writer in his own right. The interesting thing about him, you can't find anything about him without typing her name, so I like to call him Mr. Ruth and Baldwin. And so Leo died in 1943. Baldwin is not documented as his wife at the time, so we don't know if they divorced or she might have died before him. Isn't it fun not knowing? But he played the main character in her film, 4917, and they lived together in LA. We're going to talk about 4917 in a bit. This is their marriage document, very pretty. Working for Universal. So she was credited with 13 films. A lot of those titles are gone. A lot of what happened was that Universal would interchangeably use director and producer. So we don't know how many films she actually directed or produced or both. Another thing was that credits were not always given to the writers at the time for Universal. So Universal would they call themselves like champions of women at the time. They used a lot of ideas that women gave in their movies and everything, and then they just wouldn't give them any credit. And, it's kind of crazy. A company exploiting women's talents for money and not giving them credit. We don't know anything about that, so that's in the past. She talks while she types, so this is where that quote came from. Ruth Ann Baldwin's middle name is Efficiency. Miss Baldwin is the Universal Director. She has been the busy bee looking like a wounded snail some days out on location. The sun, not having fulfilled its promise to shine, she gets out her trusty typewriter, which she carries always with her on such occasions, and goes to work on a new scenario. She talks while she types too, and that was written by Grace Kingsley, who was a film columnist at the time for the Los Angeles Times. So it's just this thing, she wore many hats. A lot of those hats were very heavy, but she never stopped writing, which I greatly admire. So End of the Rainbow, this is a very interesting, I think, part of her life or her story. She was an apprentice for Lynn Reynolds for End of the Rainbow, and the film was shot in Hume, California. This is where Ruth Ann Baldwin, this is what they say, she adopted a masculine sort of look, which I think this would probably be considered a masculine look at the time, pants and a work shirt. A lot of speculation went around that, so what was she trying to prove? Was she trying to dress like a man to try to gain respect? Was she just being practical because she was in the redwood and there's a lot of trees and she had to jump over stuff? I think it's probably because it was just practical. A lot of people think it's because she thought that people would respect her if she presented herself as more masculine. Whatever the case, I respect her for it. She was playing the game at the time. So the film, what was it about? It was the daughter on a mission to expose her timber baron father's corruption regarding his logging camp. So it's a very female-centered film as well. And 4917, one of her biggest films at the time. It's a Western parody. It was kind of like her answer at the time in Hollywood to just stop making Western films. It was getting really annoying. So she wrote the scenario, she directed the film. Her husband stars in it, he's right there. And the film is really funny because it stars actors, well, he's an actor, though, but he plays a secretary who then plays an actor in the film as like a minor. And it's just like this, it's making fun of this guy who wants to fulfill like his fantasy of living in a Western. Obviously the guy's like a metaphor for Hollywood and how silly he looks, and there he is reminiscing about his old Western days. And then eventually they get like mobbed by real like robbers and stuff. But the special effects in the film were distinguished at the time. They were considered extravagant because this is actually a flashback going on in the trunk of what he just opened. So it's special effects, wow, really cool. And then eventually, we'll see here's actors playing actors, that's them getting robbed, getting tasted their own medicine. So leaving Universal, Universal changed leadership eventually. Tarkington Baker took over, and some, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not, but after that a lot of female writers started leaving Universal. I think it was probably they stopped getting work or the respect they really deserved. So she went on, after that she went on to Fox for work. And she wasn't the only writer that left Universal at the time, so it was just this whole migration, and suddenly there was this decline of female writers. And later life, she started working at Fox as a screenwriter. She was credited with 6 scenarios, and 1919 to 1921. She retires in 1921 and then slowly fades into the background of history. The last report of Ruth Baldwin was in 1925. She was living in the desert somewhere, which weirdly sounds like my future. I'm just going to disappear and retire into the desert, and I don't want anyone to know anything about me ever. And that's it. You guys don't get closure because we don't know when she died. It's over. We don't know what happened.
Thank you so much for everyone coming out today. But before I get started, if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Do you keep mental office hours? Can you turn your thoughts on and off at will? Does your brain present to the world an orderly appearance of pigeonholes tightly crammed within experiences and with facts? Now, I'm sorry to say that if you weren't able to answer yes to all of these questions, then you're no June Mathis. At least that is, according to the Los Angeles Times in 1923, in an article titled, "Most Responsible Job Ever Held by a Woman." So, how did June get there? She was born in Leadville, Colorado in 1887, and then she moved all around the United States on the vaudeville circuit as a dancer and child actor. She was so busy that by the time she was 10, she became deathly ill, and the doctor told her mother that she wouldn't actually live the day. But June didn't really like the temperament of the doctor, and according to her, she said she was determined to live in order to spite him. And it's that incident which really highlights her work ethic and her mentality for the rest of her career, when she quote, "Ever since then, I have been sure that everything is mental, and that we can overcome anything by sincere mental determination." She kept on working. She made her Broadway debut at 15 in Whose Baby Are You? She worked for the next 13 years consistently on Broadway, playing ingenues until she was 28 years old, at which time she decided to change things up a bit. She decided she wanted to become a writer. And she said that, it was kind of changing this mentality again. She described it as tuning in a different vibration, like you would tune in a different radio station. She wrote a script. She entered it into a script competition, like all of us starting writers do. And unfortunately, she didn't win the script competition, but she actually maybe did a little bit better. She got a job in Hollywood. Even though she had only been writing for a year, she got a job in the story department at B.A. Rolfe. In another year, she was promoted at B.A. Rolfe to be the head of the scenario department. And this quick success was due to her fresh and unique take on writing. And in another year, she got promoted again to be the head writer at Metro, writing films like The Saphead. So let's really take a look at what made her writing fresh and unique. So this is the silent era, and this is one of the title cards in The Saphead that starts out the film, where she describes this scene as a little street where money is everything and everything is money. It's clear, it's concise, we get an idea of what the world is, and it's funny. This is a title card for an introduction to Buster Keaton's character in the film. Bertie Van Alstyne, Esquire, his father's hope and pride. Breakfast early in the afternoon. It's not only clear, concise, and funny, but we get it's a slam dunk of a character introduction. It also shows us the dynamics between two characters and a potential source of conflict. It's really great writing. It seemed like everything she wrote, she had to have like a sweetly sardonic touch to it. This is her biographical information sheet that she probably wrote herself, in which she says her father was a physician and druggist and her mother was a good mother. Now, she was not only a really good writer, but she also really pushed forward the format of screenwriting as well. This is a time where screenplays were basically like short stories. It was paragraph after paragraph chunks, just like you would see in a novel. This is a little snippet from Camille. We see close-up of Marguerite as she registers her petulance. That looks a lot like a scene heading, right? And then that looks a lot like an action line. This is very revolutionary at this time. We also see some numbers on the side. Let's look at a bigger snippet to see what those are. You can see on the left-hand side, we see 35x and then 9, 10. What she's doing here is close-up, foreground shot, close-up, foreground, odd shot. She's going through the script like a storyboard artist, like a producer, writer, and actually literally calling the shots that they should do on set. Let's take another look at a little snippet from Blood and Sand. She starts off the script with a long shot of Seville from water, front showing the Giralda Tower. And then, to be taken by English studio or clipped from a travel film. She's not only writing and producing on the page, she's telling them where they can source the material. I do have to say though, this shot is not in the film. And the opening would be a lot better for it. It's too quick. If they had a shot of this tower, it would have played a lot better. But it is this ability to write and produce on the page that led to her biggest success. It was this big film for Metro called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. They brought her on to save the film, which she did. She talked them into hiring Rex Ingram, who had only done very small projects at the time. She was able to talk them into casting the unknown Valentino at the time into doing the project. They started a working relationship together, starting with this film and then going on to The Conquering Power and The Young Raja. And I call it a working relationship because Mathis wrote characters for Valentino that follow women to obtain fulfillment and benefit society. Now, one thing you'll see a lot when you research June Mathis, and I really hope you do, one of the first things you'll read about her in too many histories about her, is that she is best known for discovering Valentino. They say the best thing that she's known for, they determine her success in history, relationship to a man. But she made his career, and she made his career by writing roles for him that turned him into the heartthrob he was. She was creating hits for Metro. She was creating so many hits that she was promoted again to the editorial director of Goldwyn Pictures. Now, to my kind of like modern ears, when I first heard editorial director, I was thinking, oh, that's just another promotion in the story department. She's maybe just the head of the story department now. But editorial director at that time, she was the studio chief. She was the head of everything at Goldwyn Pictures. This is what she should be known best for. And they brought her on because of Four Horsemen. They wanted her to create big, ambitious projects. So she quickly greenlit Greed and Ben-Hur, another Jean Gauntier remake. They keep doing remakes of Ben-Hur during this time. But then something kind of unfortunately mundane happened. Studios combined. Goldwyn became Metro Goldwyn Mayer, and they forced her out. They fired her for doing the exact thing that they hired her to do. They wanted her to do big, ambitious projects, and they fired her because they said she was too ambitious. But she quickly rebounded. Got a job writing and producing her own films at First National Pictures, and she picked a little husband along the way. This is Silvano Balboni. He was a camera assistant on Ben-Hur. She met him, married him on a Saturday, and then went to work at First National Pictures on Monday. So that gives you a good idea of the resilience and work ethic that she had for her entire career that she started at an early age. For First National, she wrote and produced a series of films for Colleen Moore, and she was at the top of her game. She was breaking stereotypes. Even though she had been a studio chief, there was still this stereotype that women couldn't direct and produce films. She's actually mentioned in an article that says, oh, June Mathis, she has such a lazy life as a female writer. She just gets up in the morning and then meets with 40 people. And then she oversees all of the productions of First National and writes half of their movies. Ho-hum, what a delight. She's she's the boss on all of her films. You can see on this poster for Sinners in Paradise in the lower left-hand corner, you can clearly see her name there. Let's go in a little bit closer. You say her name as writer-producer is 3 times the size of the director. And the director is her husband. She was at the top of her game, just killing it. Nothing, it seems, could stop her. And she's breaking through the glass ceiling. We can see her here as the only first national female on the producers and directors list. But then, the Virgin held me back. Oh, what would have been the use? In their hearts, in their thoughts, she still would have been there, a phantom rival. I like to think that these are the last words that June Mathis heard. She died where she started her career on Broadway. She was attending a performance of Jean Bart's The Squall and died in the audience as the show was going on. To show you not only how important she was in Hollywood, but in the world in general, the New York Times reported on her death on the front page above the fold. She was buried in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and you can kind of see over here Valentino's right next to her. Just to be clear, he is buried in her family's crypt. She had such a prolific career. She was only active in the industry for 10 years, but she wrote or was editorial director on 113 films. What would she have been able to do with another 10 or another 20? I like to think that she died right before talkies came in, right before unions formed and pushed women out of the industry. How could they have pushed women out of the industry when there was a woman on top calling the shots? But unfortunately, she died too soon, and her candle burned out too quickly. Thank you very much.
Has watched the show I Love Lucy, I think. I've grown up with it my whole life and had no idea about Madelyn Pugh Davis before. She called herself the girl writer behind I Love Lucy. Madelyn Pugh Davis was born in Indiana, and she was born in a family of all women. Her parents were early feminists, I guess, and they also were a family that laughed a lot and were constantly joking with each other. So they were hoping for a boy, and they had picked a boy's name for her, and her entire life they mocked her about it. And they also were the inspiration for a lot of the stuff behind I Love Lucy. I said Pugh Davis is feminist as fuck. She always knew that she could be more than just a wife because her parents basically taught her that. She always knew she wanted to be a writer, so even like in grade school, she would write her book reports in prose, basically to entertain herself. She didn't really care what the teachers thought. She just thought it was more entertaining. She got to go to a high school that was focused on writing, and it was also the first high school that had a daily newspaper, and there's a lot of famous writers came from that school, including Kurt Vonnegut. Her dad had lost all of his money in the Great Depression, so she wanted to go to college, and she was industrious and found different ways to raise money to send herself to college, and she went to Indiana University. After college, it was during World War II, she thought it would be a good job to be a foreign war correspondent. However, she realized, after she tried to get those jobs, that they don't give those jobs to women. So she tried to get any job she could in a newspaper, and those jobs were like the style column or obituaries. So luckily, she had an ex-boyfriend that was still her friend and gave her a recommendation for a radio job in Indiana, and she got the job, and she did what we all should do. She got the job, excelled, and asked for a raise within 6 months, and she got it. After she worked there for a while, she moved to Hollywood with her sister and her sister's husband, and she brought a letter of recommendation from the radio station in Indiana. And she actually went on job interviews the first day that she got to Hollywood and landed a job the first day at NBC Radio, which I think is pretty amazing. If anyone's ever tried to get a job, it's hard to get a job on the first day. And she also continued to write her own stuff. So she wrote a poem that she sold to Saturday Evening Post, and she wrote a vaudeville-style review that she produced in Hollywood, and it was like a one-day only thing that she just did for fun. She was, again, like I said, she was feminist. She was always focused on her career, so she stayed at NBC Radio for 6 months, and then she moved to CBS Radio. CBS Radio was the it place to be. It had all the popular shows. So she wrote for Steve Allen, and she wrote for an original show that Lucille Ball was on, not with Desi, just a different husband. And she also met her writing partner, Bob Carroll Jr. there, and they worked together for 50 years after that. After she worked with Lucy on the radio, Lucy wanted to move to TV, which CBS thought was a good idea. However, they didn't think that Desi was an appropriate husband for Lucy, even though they were actually married in real life. So Desi was a big ally for Pugh Davis, and so basically the writers came up with a show that they could take on the road. They toured around America to make sure that they could prove to CBS that they had an audience, which they did, and then they ended up making I Love Lucy. And I'm so glad they actually stuck to it, and, you know. They came up with story ideas in a ton of different ways. So for the famous Candy episode, they were like, Lucy should have a job. So they looked in the phone book, and they said, and they went alphabetical order, and they found Candy Maker. And they were like, hey, that sounds like a good job. And they went to a candy maker and watched what they do, and decided, oh, that would be really funny if Lucy was bad at it. And then for the grape stomping episode, there's an Italian film that was popular at the time, which some of us have watched, Bitter Rice, and this is their tribute to that, which is not a comedy at all. As some of us know, it's not a comedy, but this is their tribute to that. The other great thing about Pugh Davis is every stunt that Lucy did, Pugh Davis would try in the writer's room beforehand. So anything you see Lucy doing on screen, Pugh Davis did it. And she did it, maybe not as funnily as Lucy, but she did it to prove that Lucy would be able to do it, and also that Lucy wouldn't look stupid doing it. So Lucy trusted her, basically. They were nominated for 2 Emmys for writing, but they never won. I Love Lucy was #1 in the ratings for 4 out of the 6 seasons, and it was always in the top 3. After I Love Lucy, Pugh Davis and Carroll Jr. continued to work with both Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, so they worked on every show that Lucy did after that. They wrote a movie for her. They also produced the show Alice from the 2nd season to the end. They wrote a show for Carol Channing, Doris Day, and Debbie Reynolds, and they pitched a show to Gypsy Rose Lee, but nothing happened with that. And then she died in 2011. You can watch a lot of her videos online. They did a good interview with her for the Writers Guild, and it's pretty amazing. And she also wrote a book called Laughing with Lucy, if you want to read it. It's all about her life in her own words. And that's all I got.
So wonderful. See, now you've all watched a million I Love Lucy's. Now you know who you should thank for it, right? That's why we want to know who the writers are of these things we like. All right, next we're happy to introduce Cynthia Macadam, who will talk about Amy Sherman Palladino, a name you may know. Yes, no?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yes.
All right, there we go. Cynthia.
Okay. Anybody else need to leave before I start? Okay. In 2018, Amy Sherman Palladino was finally recognized and won 3 Emmys for her Amazon series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. But along with her husband, Daniel, she's been creating frank and funny television for over 30 years. And although she's best known for her dramas or hour-long dramedies, she got her start in half-hour sitcoms. She's worked on Rosanne or Veronica's Closet. Hopefully, y'all probably have never heard of any of these shows, but these were all shows during the 90s. Then Gilmore Girls, which you might be familiar with. This was a show that didn't work out for them, Bunheads, and I'm going to be going back over this, but I just did this little thing. The Amazon reboot, and finally, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. she grew up, she's very private. She's not on any kind of social media, and it's hard to really find out about her. She grew up and was born in Sherman Oaks, California, and she did not like it and didn't feel in place in that suburban kind of strip mall lifestyle. She always felt like she belonged like in New York, and I think maybe that's why she's created these settings for her shows that are so heightened and lovely, quirky, but really unreal. And she described the town of Stars Hollow, which is what Gilmore Girls is set in, as being a town built in a snow globe, which is pretty much. She was a dancer. Her parents were in show business. Her father, Don Sherman, was a really successful comedian. Her mom was a dancer. She still is. That's her. I watch her, but she's still dancing. She's in her 80s, still dancing. And Amy Sherman Palladino started dancing when she was 4, and it was a big disappointment to her mom that she decided to be a writer and not a dancer. She did not go to college. She worked, she studied at the Groundlings and performed with them, but she always regretted not going to college, which again comes up a lot, especially in the Gilmore Girls, with the character of Lorelai, kind of regretting that. Her first writing job was on the original Roseanne show, and she joined the staff after Roseanne had fired everybody from the first season. and I just realized that Becky is not in this picture, but she is best known for writing the shows about Becky and Roseanne. She wrote a lot about the mother-daughter relationship, which she became famous for, really known for. And she wrote an episode where Becky goes on the pill, which is a pretty well-known episode, and it's always kind of talked about how it was kind of groundbreaking. And actually, to start the show, she chose this over going on the road with cats. So that's when she decided not to be a writer. So, yeah. So, thankfully, she did. So, I don't know what to do. Okay. And so, Gilmore Girls, which I think maybe you might have heard of or watched. Hopefully, it's on Netflix. It's about a show about a mother and daughter 16 years apart. And it's full of these smart, funny ladies. All of them could have well thought out. They could all have television series of their own. Suki St. James, you might recognize as the Melissa McCarthy before The Bridesmaids. All these characters were smart and funny, and that is what she's known for. See, if you watch the show, you might notice her musical theater and dancing background, and I hope I'm going to go to this one. I don't know if this is going to work to make it go. No. Well, sorry. I have a video, but I guess it's not going to play. This is I'll just go on to Bunhead. So the next show, after she left Gilmore Girls, after 6 seasons, and she tried another half-hour sitcom that didn't get picked up. She went on to this show called Bunheads, which is a horrible title. It only lasted a season. It's on Hulu as well, and it's really good. But again, it's basically a mother and a daughter, and then the younger daughter's she's the same actress, and it just is good, and it has dancing and music. And then and hopefully you've all had a chance to watch The Amazing Mrs. Maisel, which is set in the 1960s in New York, and about a housewife who, after her husband announces he's leaving her, decides to become a stand-up comedian, and what happens. And it is very musical and very well done and beautiful and well shot, and obviously it's being given Emmys, and I'm sure sorry. And this character right here, Alex Borstein, she won an Emmy, and she was supposed to be the original Suki, but she couldn't do it. But and it's already been picked up for another season. It's starting in December, and it's already been picked up for a 3rd season. So we're going to be looking forward to many more seasons of her frank and funny characters and women. Okay, we're done.
Excellent. You definitely should check out the show. Big Emmy winner right now. Thank you, Cynthia. That was great. All right. And we're going to wrap it out with one more presentation on a woman that you should know but don't, because her former comedy partner became more famous than she. Yet she's done some really cool things in the 70s. It's going to be Krista Dyson telling us about Elaine May. All right.
Okay, I have a little quick tech thing I got to do here because I'm an outlier. I use Google Slides, so bear with me while we launch this baby. So I'm a writer and filmmaker out of South Florida, and this woman is, if I had known about her when I was younger, I absolutely would have been directing my own films. But I didn't know about her because she's sort of someone that you don't hear about. When I started my presentation, when I started this presentation, I always like to ask people, how many of you have already heard of Elaine May, just to get a sense of the audience? A lot of you, so maybe about 50-50. So that's kind of the point of why we need to talk about Elaine May. Now, Dr. Rosanne Welch knows I could talk about Elaine May for an hour, a semester, but we only have a few minutes. So I'm just going to tell you 5 things you need to know about Elaine May, and hopefully this will give you the impetus to go out and check out some of her films and or watch some of her original comedy that she did. So, first of all, she was born into improv comedy before improv comedy was even a thing. Her father was part of a Yiddish vaudeville theater troupe, and Elaine performed with this troupe until she was about 10 years old. She likes to joke that she couldn't, she was doing the parts of boys, and once she developed breasts, she had to, take her show on the road no more. But in reality, what happened was her father, Jack Berlin, passed away, and so her and her mother moved around a little bit. They moved out to Los Angeles for a little while. She met and married her first husband, Marvin May, thus becoming not Elaine Berlin, but Elaine May, and that name stuck with her for the rest of her career, even though that marriage only lasted about a year. She also had a daughter at a very young age, so by age 18, she'd been married, divorced, has now a single parent, and she's sort of working at these odd jobs. So she decides to look for something else. She's a brilliant, brilliant, genius woman. And so she decides to go to the University of Chicago, because you could go there. She actually dropped out of school when she was younger as well. So she decides to go to the University of Chicago because they would accept students that hadn't graduated high school at that time. I don't think you can do that anymore. But and she said, this is Elaine's word, "Plec is very strange. I'm lucky I met the guy who said go to the University of Chicago." So she hitchhiked there. And then she met a man named Paul Sills, who you'll hear about in a second. And then I met you, my few pieces of luck. And the you she's talking about is this guy, Mike Nichols. Paul Sills, who is the founder of this improv troupe called the Compass Players, they were sort of the forerunner to the Second City. They happened for a few years, and then Second City started in Chicago. So this is like improv before it was even improv. And Elaine met up with Mike Nichols on Paul's recommendation, as you see there, because apparently they were both rather hostile, and it was a perfect match. They ruled the comedy scene in the 1950s. They quickly outshadowed the other Compass Players, much to the chagrin of the other Compass Players, but they were unstoppable. They were on TV. They were, the 50s. Nichols and May, they were continuously in the public eye, which I think is really what opens doors for a lot of people when they go to Hollywood during this era. It's because they maybe are, especially women, they're famous for something else. They've written books or they have some other entree. And so this comedy team is what the entree was. They were known as egghead comedians, hipsters, the hipsters, right? That was the time. They were playing at the Village Vanguard in New York City. They were doing all the things on the cutting edge. And then, Mike Nichols, a guy who you may have heard of, he said about Elaine, "I would have never been a performer without her. She was shockingly, endlessly inventive. She could go on, and I really couldn't. I never did a good scene with anybody else. It wasn't only that she was so great, but when I was with her, I became something more than I had been." So he credits her with a lot of the success and genius of their duo. Unfortunately, those things didn't last. Now, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not they were romantically involved, but they were definitely a partnership, and things kind of, went awry. I will leave that to you to discover if you should want to. You can shoot me an email, and I can talk about this endlessly. But they did split very quickly after a show that ran on Broadway. For over 300 performances. They were nominated for their comedy albums, for Grammys, and they had so much happening, and they just walked away. Mike says, it was personal as well as professional, the worst time of my life. Not only had I lost my best friend, I lost my work. I was the half of something, and now when I was Elaine-less, I ended up directing. Now again, Mike Nichols is fine. He did The Graduate, he did Birdcage, he did a primary color. He did a lot of film. He's fine. He got winner. Don't worry about Mike. Let's talk about Elaine. So, you can actually binge her entire filmography in a weekend. It doesn't even have to be a long weekend, because there's really only a couple of films that are truly Elaine's work. First of all, in 1971, the film A New Leaf, which is kind of a cult classic. Elaine wrote it, directed it, and starred in it. Please note the asterisk. She did those other things, directing and starring, because they couldn't really find anybody else they were happy with, so she agreed to direct and then star in it for no more money. She's with a guy you might recognize, Walter Matthau. It's a genius, hilarious, dark, satirical comedy. It's amazing. It's not the film Elaine really wanted. The ending she was very unhappy with, and we'll talk about that in a second. You may have heard of The Heartbreak Kid, 1972. It's a Neil Simon written screenplay, but Elaine directed it beautifully. It's Charles Grodin, Sybil Shepherd. Here's a name you might recognize, Jeannie Berlin, because wasn't Elaine's name Elaine Berlin back in the day? That's Elaine's daughter. And Eddie Alberg. So again, the performances in this are unbelievably hilarious. This film is actually a huge influence to Jerry Seinfeld. You may have heard of that dude. But what did critics do? They compared it to The Graduate, Mike Nichols' film. So even on her own, doing her own work, she really can't get away from that Nichols and May. Jeannie Berlin was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for this film, and she sort of favors Elaine. This is an incredible scene. If you just go and look for this scene in The Heartbreak Kid, where Charles Grodin is trying to explain that he doesn't want to stay married to his newly married wife, he's met someone else or fallen in love with someone. This is an amazing scene, and she blows Grodin out of the water with her acting. All right. Now, Elaine has these two films, critically acclaimed. In 1976, she makes a film that's totally not at all like this. It's dark, it's gritty. John Cassavetes, Peter Falk. It's called Mikey and Nicky. Some critics said, wow, that name sure sounds a lot like Mike Nichols. It's about a duo who are trying to deceive each other. And they kind of know the other one's out to get them, and it leaves you hanging till the very end of this film. It's a very gritty indie film. Elaine says, if you can give me a better definition of hell than mutual distrust, I'd like to hear it. And I would say, in her films, if you stop and think, this is a big thematic thing that goes through. It's a vein that runs through her films, even with The Heartbreak Kid, even with A New Leaf. When the next film that I'm about to talk about, again, a duo, a partnership, where things just go horribly wrong. Okay, so this is a film worth watching if you can find it. It was on Filmstruck for a while, but goodbye Filmstruck, so I don't know what's going to happen. Get there, watch it if you can. It is available, but her films are hard to find, so you really do have to root around to locate copies of them, but it's a genius piece of work. And it is, in some ways, still not 100% the film that Elaine intended to make, but it's pretty darn close. 1987's Ishtar. If you've heard about Ishtar, you probably heard it was like the greatest disaster in all of filmmaking history. The PR and press about Ishtar has essentially just made this into the biggest flop ever. It's not really a bad film. It's a very funny, quirky comedy starring a couple of guys you might have heard of, Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman. They play total schmucks. They are yutzes. They are just completely incompetent. The satire and kind of like Elaine's background in that sort of like space of theater. It's a showbiz allegory. Everything that happens in this movie is just these two guys trying to become, famous for their art and failing. She wrote it, she directed it, but things, these guys were fantastic in terms of their performances. You really buy in that Warren Beatty is just an idiot and he can't get a woman, which I think is hilarious. And and then they go to the desert. And things get weird. So, I don't know. And they actually shot it overseas, so I could talk at length again about why Ishtar was so maligned, but it really was a situation where the studio kind of tried to bury this film because they didn't like the filmmakers and the actors. There was a new person that came in as head of the studio, and they just weren't really happy with what was going on and how much money was getting spent. So what Elaine says is, well, if all the people who hated Ishtar had seen it, I'd be a rich woman, and that's probably true. So they were actually talking about how bad it was without even actually giving it a look. And one of the things I love about Elaine, and this is her in a more recent, she's worked more recently with some of Woody Allen's work, because she and Woody Allen share some of the same origins in New York. But she had to fight for creative control of her films, and fight she did. One of the things about her, someone once said, is she's a woman of many words, but cut isn't one of them. So what that means is, as a director, she was really filming quite a lot, and budgets were running over. With A New Leaf, she turned in a 3-hour final cut. She allegedly hid negatives under her bed so that the studio couldn't recut the ending. She sued the studio. They won. She wanted her name removed from the film. She lost. It's not the film she wanted to make, but it's a genius film nevertheless. Mikey and Nikki, she shot 1.4 million feet of film. That's 3 times how much they shot for Gone with the Wind. She misses, not surprisingly, she misses the film's delivery date because she's got all this footage to wade through. And this is the days of film, right? She would have been an amazing genius if she were shooting the days of digital, where, you know, that would not be so difficult. But she was shooting on film stock. So Paramount took away her final cut. The studio took it away. She sued them. You know, Elaine sort of got this reputation for being very contentious, and I think that kind of stuck with her. But it was because she wanted her vision on the screen, and that was hard for her to do. This is a quote from Ishtar. In the film, one of the characters says it to the other, and it takes a lot of nerve to have nothing at your age. Most guys would be ashamed, but you've got the guts to say, the hell with it. You say, you'd rather have nothing than settle for less. Elaine wrote those words. I feel like she lived those words. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because that's why maybe we don't know about her, because she didn't want to settle for less, and so her voice kind of got silenced. And she has become a hidden figure. It's the 5th fact that you need to know. Even though she's done a lot of things, even though she was nominated for her screenplay for Heaven Can Wait, with Warren Beatty. Again, their relationship goes way back. And she's done uncredited work on things like Tootsie and Labyrinth and Dangerous Minds, and she's actually made a documentary about Mike Nichols. She's worked with Mike Nichols on Primary Colors and The Birdcage. Those are films you've probably seen. You probably heard of Mike Nichols. Did you think about Elaine May? Maybe not. I hope you did, and maybe you'll give these films another look as well, because she's part of the genius behind them, and the two of them together really are incredible, the synergy between them. But here's the reason why I want to bring this up. Mark Norman, well, the hated Mark Norman. Sorry, Mark Norman, if you're watching. But the stand-up comedy of Mike Nichols is what he says on page 331 of What Happens Next. And I take 2 exceptions to that. Exception number 1, these two were not doing stand-up comedy. They were doing improv. They were doing sketch comedy. They were writing and performing their own material. And step 2, Mike Nichols wasn't up there by himself. He had this beautiful, courageous, fearless, inventive, hilarious woman right next to him, and yet her name doesn't appear next to his in the history book. So that's kind of part of why we do this program with Stevens College Low Residency MFA. We want to make sure that these women's names are not erased and they don't become invisible. So that's why I'm here, and that's why Elaine May inspires me, and I hope you'll go out and look for some of her films. And there is a director's cut of Ishtar, so maybe you can find that and see how it really should have gone. She's had a lot of influences of people you may have heard of who openly credit her, and you know, Nichols and May as well, but she's incredible. So thank you very much. I hope you learned
A lovely way to end, because that's really the theme, and you're exactly right. That's one of the things we try to do in the program, is remind people that we should think about how women aren't written into the histories, and how do we get them written back in. We learn about them, we spread the word, we go see their films. So I thank all of you for coming. We want to remind you to come to Skylark Book Club if you're free tomorrow from 1 to 3. There'll be, I think, refreshments. I'm not sure if someone's heard of that. But it's a lovely place to check out in your college town. And we'd love to have you come hear little 2-minute snippets about the women in here. Not 8 minutes. We appreciate your time today. I hope you learned something. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask any of the folks who presented, or in general about the MFA, or about women in screenwriting history? Totally open to anything. Or you could all go have lunch. You're all hungry. I really appreciate your time today. We hope to see you across the weekend at some of the films, and have a lovely time at Citizen Jane.